In 1996, YouTube and all other social media was a myth. The internet itself was a rarity compared to today. Apple was just a fruit, and Amazon was just a rainforest. But one thing they did still have was rap music. And God, they had it good. I was born just 20 years ago in 2001, which is really shit because that means I missed out on being around when one of the greatest albums of all time was released by just 5 years. Fresh out of jail and backed by major label Death Row, Tupac dedicated every minute of his 1996 to making All Eyez on Me his greatest ever project and one of the most iconic albums in the history of music, which is now a quarter of a century old. It's actually mental how long ago that Tupac era was. So of course, like everyone's been saying for years, respect to the legend himself and this masterpiece that he created all that time ago. When I say that this album changed the game, I mean that this album changed the game. If this project had never came to fruition, then most of the rappers that we know and love today wouldn't have even existed. Hip hop was truly born in the 90s. The come up from NWA and similar artists in the late 80s paved the way for some of the game's biggest individual rappers to take the industry by storm in the following decade. Snoop, Biggie, Jay-Z, Scarface, Nas, and of course, Tupac are just a few of the icons that made the 90s what most people believe to be the golden era of hip hop. Following on from Me Against the World, All Eyez on Me was Tupac's fourth solo album and came with even more attitude, prowess and hood energy than anything he'd made before. Most would put this down to his new affiliation with Death Row, but it's most likely due to the confidence and ego growth that he would have received from the success of his previous music. Despite this, and despite the violent atmosphere of which this project would have been created, it wasn't all just about guns, drugs and violence. This album still features that confidence-inspiring and motivational music that Tupac was so famous for, which was of course mainly aimed at people of an ethnic minority or people just in the struggle. All Eyez on Me also featured some of Pac's best love songs. Now don't get me wrong, these aren't the sort of love songs you'd play at a royal wedding, but they're still love related either way. Now of course the main focus was gangster rap, and I'm sure I don't really need to remind anyone that Tupac was really about it, and a complete different breed to 99% of the rappers we see today. Ultimately, he lived by the sword and sadly died by it, with the majority of his lyrics in this project being just as hardcore as the way he was tragically taken. Being produced by Death Row, Tupac was around fellow icons Snoop Dogg, Outlawz and Dre while recording and putting this project together, which of course led to incredible beats, feature verses and a true sense of collaboration on multiple tracks. And I feel that this really added to that special aura that this project clearly has. All Eyez on Me is one big album that consisted of 2 discs, each featuring 13 tracks. And these are full-length songs as well. Most of these tracks ranged from 4 to 5 minutes and some even beyond 6 minutes, which is completely different to music of this time where most songs nowadays are literally half that, maybe even less. As much as I'd just love to sit here and turn this into a full Tupac documentary, and don't get me wrong, there's a strong chance that could come in the future, like if you want it. This video's primary aim is to discuss this legendary album that transformed his career, transformed the game 25 years ago today. Now I can already see the comments from people of the older generation saying that I know nothing about Tupac, nothing about the era that this project came out, and I don't even know why you're talking about this, etc, etc. And look, I'm not trying to be an expert here at all, and I'm far from knowing everything about the 90s, and I totally understand that, yeah, that wasn't my era. However, this is still an album that I've listened to many times, and I still do to this day. And as this video is mainly going to be like a retrospective look at the album and how it compares to music of today, surely it might be interesting to see someone from a completely different generation's opinion on music that was around before I even was. Of course, for an industry like hip-hop, 25 years is an astronomical amount of time, as this is one of the fastest paced industries in music. So of course I'm not surprising anyone when I say that this project has an instant vintage feel to it. Every song is nothing like the music we hear today, And to be honest, I'd mostly put that down to the beats. 90s hip-hop beats were so much more simple than the beats we hear today. The lack of electronic sounds and the usual very consistent tempos, hi-hats and bass create a vibe that we don't really get anymore. Pretty much every beat is extremely chilled and laid back, which then makes the flow just so easy to get into, which leads to the song in general just feeling so chilled, smooth, and like buttery smooth. Now yeah, this does lead to fairly more simple flows and way less flow switches. However, this consistency just makes music that is so easy to listen to and almost relaxing, even if some of those lyrics are brutal as fuck. Whenever I'm after some chilled background music or just a song to drive along to or something, 90s hip-hop is what I go to 90% of the time. Like, it really makes time fly and it makes you just zone out and chill. So yeah, this album has massively aged, but because it's aged so well, it's almost created its own genre of music for itself, which leaves this project and other music like it timeless, which is what a lot of people refer to this type of music as. Music like this will always live on, because if you want chilled hip-hop and some of the best beats ever made, then no one has done it better since the guys in the 90s. So something I love about Tupac and similar artists of this generation is they realised that they didn't need to scream on a track and be hugely over the top to get across the point that they're gangster. In possibly the most iconic track for this album, Ambitions as a Rider, Tupac sounds sinister and basically conveys that, yeah, he'll fuck you up. But he does that almost by whispering. He doesn't need to scream and shout about it. He doesn't need to go over the top. His power, his presence on the beat, and his lyrics do the talking for him. So that gangster feel shows without him having to burst his lungs. So of course the main way that this is conveyed is through the lyrics, which in every track are just spot on. These lyrics are far more brutal than most lyrics we get today. If most rappers spoke like Tupac did back then today's snowflakes would just have a heart attack. Like, it's such a different time, man. Something we need more of today is the amount of lyrics that Tupac dedicated to discussing racial issues, problems in society, and basically being a voice for the black community. Because sadly, this is something we still need discussing by powerful figures. Because still to this day, people are having to deal with racist bullshit that Tupac was covering back then, and they're still experiencing that every day now, 25 years later. It's an absolute disgrace when you think about it, especially when figures such as Tupac and similar artists made such a stance and push to try and change things, and idiots just seem to go back to their old ways no matter what. But don't get me wrong, there are a lot of very inspirational and influential people talking about these problems nowadays and acting on these problems as well. But there's not enough, and two, I'd struggle to mention a single person that has done even half the amount of impact that Tupac did in the 90s for that movement. In work he did outside of his music and work he did in his music, he was absolutely inspirational for that reason and many others. You can tell that everything he says in his lyrics comes straight from the heart, straight from his feelings, and straight from his emotions or memories. Everything has true experiences and passion put into it. And that's because, as I mentioned, Pac really did live that life. So he does have real emotions and real memories to draw his words from. One of the few current rappers that I could really, truly feel that from is Polo G, who not only discusses racial issues and things of that matter, but he also can do what Tupac does in terms of making you feel like he's really about it and really portraying that he's a serious guy without having to scream and shout. And that's all down to, obviously, like I said, the lyrics, but also that cold, serious delivery. And Polo G even discussed racial issues over the Changes beat, obviously one of the most iconic songs from Tupac. And you can tell that Polo G is one of the many rappers of today that was hugely inspired by Tupac. Picking a favourite song from this project is like picking a favourite child, if I knew what that was like. There's so many hidden gems, and across the board there's just so many classics. If I had to pick one of my favourite songs that maybe is less well known, because obviously there's many iconic songs on here, it would be No More Pain, because the delivery on this track is just hard as fuck. I love everything about it, and the power in his lyrics and voice will just get you going all the time. And to be honest, there's basically not a single song on this album that I don't like. The only thing I will say is the remix to California Love, which is obviously one of Pac's best ever songs, isn't great. They kind of ruined that song with the remix, and usually remixes can make songs better or just different. In this case, I think they just trashed it, which is a shame because, as I said, I love that song and I really wish the original was on this project. It was just so sick. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't sit here listening to this 25-year-old project every day, but if I'm in the mood, then there is just nothing that comes close to it. And if I want to listen to Tupac, 9 times out of 10, it's this album because it's just the most iconic and the best in my opinion. It's such a shame that his legacy got cut short, because if he was still around since then, he would have released even more phenomenal music, and it's just such a shame that we weren't given that opportunity, and we also weren't given the opportunity to see him around and kicking still today, you know, chilling with OGs such as Dr. Dre. Like, man, that'd have been so cool. So in these retrospective reviews, we often touch on the point of how would this album perform if it was released tomorrow. But in this case, like, it's almost impossible for me to judge because, like I said, there is just literally nothing like this anymore in the music industry. Like, we don't hear anything like this anymore. And obviously, I think the specialness of Tupac's music and work is the fact that it was from the past. Everything in that generation was different, as I mentioned right at the start. And a lot of the references that Pac brings up in his songs probably wouldn't even be relevant for today. To be honest, I truly hope that people even younger than me will still go on to appreciate this type of music. And maybe it's our job to keep the legacy of Tupac going and pass it down to the even younger generations and keep his music alive. So overall, like, All Eyez on Me is one of my favorite projects of all time across the board from any generation. I do really truly wish that there was more similar music to this today. But like I said, we've always got it to go back to. This truly was a golden era that didn't last very long, you know. It came and went before a lot of us were born. Probably a lot of you lot watching this video weren't even around either. Like, I think probably a lot of us weren't. And that is where the specialness lies, in my opinion. And we've seen this today. It's so similar to what we've seen with artists like X, Juice WRLD, Pop Smoke from our generation. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they were as good rappers as Tupac. It was also different. They're different people. They're completely different. The music was different and everything. But what I'm saying is, when we're older, we'll look back on them in the same way. And the reason why they will be truly special, probably more special than anyone else in our generation, is because of the fact that they were taken and their legacy was cut short, and they were taken early. So it just adds that sort of aura and special feeling to people's music that, you know, it makes you appreciate it, I suppose. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I tried to make it a bit like a short documentary at the start, and then obviously transition it into a 25 years later review of such an iconic project. I would love to do a full Tupac documentary. Obviously that'll take more time planning and work, but if it's what you want, then I'm happy to do it, so let me know. But anyway, on this day, 25 years ago, one of the best projects of all time was released. It's the one I've just been talking about. So, when you leave this video, I want you to all go and play it. Just please, just go and play it. Even if you've never heard it before, play it because you're missing out. So yeah, go and put these legendary songs on right now.
That shit was dope. Fresh out of jail. History in the motherfucking making.